So the next stage is the movement of tone and big form modeling. We start off with the movement of tone and the fall of light. That's a new thing to explain. Tends to be our subject is lit, from somewhere above rather than, with a spotlight from straight from the side. We'll just sort of imagine that the light source is somewhere higher above, which means that there will be a fall of light as we head towards the lower areas of the figure. That means that basically everything on here will be darker than on here, even in the lightest parts. So the fall of light is a type of movement of tone, as we would call it. Movement of tone would mean, the tone sort of depending on the position in relation to the light source. As I pointed out in the figure fundamentals video, if you were to have someone on a flat plane like this, and they would maybe be lying down on here, and then the light source is straight above, maybe it's pretty evenly lit because the distance is relatively the same. The same would be, if you have a very short object, maybe a cast, a plaster cast that is, knee high at most. There's not going to be a lot of change in this area as opposed to this entire length that a human being occupies. So basically it's subtle, but we can see it on the reference image, so we're going to put it in. Areas in the calf area, the foot area, they are a little bit darker than the topmost shoulder area on our figure. It's pretty subtle. On top of that, there tends to be a reddish tone to the feet and the hands especially. There are some other areas that can have a tone that is slightly reddish, and the red tone makes them also a little bit darker in value. So let's just start off with darkening slightly the foot area. The tone in the feet is actually pretty dark if we look at the image, so let's just make it quite apparent. And again, as you can see, this stage is done mostly with the tools we have, not the pencil by itself. So maybe we can compare with the model. Squinting down, we can see there's definitely not a whole lot of brightness in this area, so maybe we can just even push it a little bit further down in value. Basically, we want this tone to sort of represent the lightest light in this area. After this, we will then apply the big form modeling, which is essentially darkening towards the lightest area to make the form turn. So let's just keep going. Keep checking our model that we don't go overboard. Our goal here is to make a somewhat, even gradation from the bottom to the, let's say maybe the torso area. In this case, maybe the pelvic area is where the effect kind of stops, as I see, in the buttocks area here. It's definitely, as light as the shoulder area, maybe even slightly lighter, but that's, I guess, due to, the planes facing the light source more directly. It's not really the fall of light doing that. Also, now that we reach this area, again, I forgot to erase the plumb line. Let's do that. In this case, it's still pretty easy. On the bark, I forgot to erase it already, and I had to erase it already after a bit of big form modeling, so just get rid of that. I mean, you can erase it later as well, but then you're just going to have to redo whatever you erase along with it, so that's the issue. Timing doesn't really matter apart from that, so we could have already erased it also before the grouping of the darks, but Just feels logical to do it here, since parts of the dark also sort of absorb the absorb the plumb line. We don't have to erase it then. Let's not do any extra work we don't need to do. It's all about efficiency. So perhaps this is enough for the torso area. Maybe we can a little bit also continue very lightly and just sort of ignore the fact that on the model it's a little bit lighter in here than the shoulders. We can just emphasize this sort of movement of tone. In this case, the fall of light coming from the top. So we can do it a little bit for the hand as well. As I said, the fingers are quite pinkish in many places. That will sort of darken the overall tone of the hand many times. And we can do a little bit of the movement of tone for the arms as well. One thing is, of course, as well, we have many times people who have somewhat tanned arms because maybe during the summer, you know, people wear short sleeve shirts. The hands and arms usually could be a little bit darker than the upper parts of the torso and the arm. All right, let's just add a little bit of tone here also. A little bit of darkening here also sort of recedes this back. So the arm that is kind of behind the model, we can darken it ever so slightly to make it also sort of go behind the model a little bit more. So that's more of a conceptual choice. All right, then let's start the big form modeling. We can start maybe with the neck, a very easy and quick target. And the neck is mostly in halftone, so you can probably just sort of scrub along the shadow edge here and then darken it a little bit. We can go back and reinforce this shadow a little bit over here. Just fix this outline a little bit. We don't need to do that at this stage, but just distracts me a little bit, so I can do what I want. This is my project. But you shouldn't, of course. Do as I say, not as I do. That's the classic one. All right. Just softening this shadow edge a little bit. Since our goal is to make things kind of three-dimensional at this stage. Okay, so let's maybe start at the bottom after we tackled the easy target of the neck. Again, big form modeling, we want to target the big general shape. The foot is a kind of, you know, you can imagine it's a sock shape. It's a sock covered foot at this point. We don't put any anatomical details in, we just want the form. So let's first darken the sort of backside a little bit. I recommend usually working from the shadow to the lighter bits. That usually helps a little bit with creating the form, and as well as ensuring you really don't go too dark also on the center, because then you get very dark near the edge, and then it quite quickly, honestly, becomes lighter as you proceed from there. There's a very thin strip of shadow here which I have to reinforce a little bit because we sort of already lost it. If you're about to lose your drawing entirely during the big form modeling, of course, then I recommend you go back. But if you just sort of miss some small details here and there, then you shouldn't too much worry about it. I think we maybe pushed the darker tones a little bit too far since we don't have a very precise tool. So let's just nudge it back a little bit. Make the sort of center lit area a little bit larger. So I think the shadow area got a little bit too light at some point. Maybe we just sort of took the tones out with the stump right there. So let's just reinforce these shadows a little bit. If it's a very small area and it's a very subtle sort of turning, you can also do it with a pencil. It doesn't take too long. The main goal, of course, for doing stuff with the tools is efficiency. It's way slower to hatch things like this rather than just fill in the tone with a larger tool. Makes sense, right? Okay. Okay, that's enough for that foot. Then we start pushing the modeling on this foot again. It's also turning from the underneath a little bit. It's honestly barely anything. It's kind of just barely lit on this side, so you can just sort of imagine it turning from here to the heel, more like, not this sort of loaf-like turning around itself. We do have a bit of that as well, but we want to have this entire plane actually somewhat darker. And then we can turn it from here to the middle. You can see me just reinforcing the darks here and there, so that when we actually go in with the stump again, then we can just use that tone a little bit to smudge it around and make it turn. Maybe you can see, maybe not. There I was a bit more careful with the shadow, so I don't have to redo everything. That means I left a little bit of a lighter tone in between the shadow and the turning tone, which effectively means the modeling is not going to work too well. Also, I made the turning tone way too wide because of the large tool I have. So maybe learning from this couple times, I'll just switch to the slightly more accurate paper stump, so I don't have to fix things all the time. So I'm fixing a little bit here and there as I go, but the main thing shouldn't be fixing your drawing at this stage. It should be just creating the form. Let's not forget the turning form on this side. The light is coming from there, yes, but we don't have the lightest light on the sort of planes that are turning away either. We want to keep those slightly darker than the center light. Otherwise it's not going to look three-dimensional, it's going to look flat. Effectively, we would like to have this outline sort of be representative of our turning tone, so we might have to actually go in and lighten the outline a little bit as well. So the calves are pretty much just like cylinders. Don't really have to think about it too hard when you're modeling these. Of course, just sort of turns around like this. There are some complex forms that you will have to, use a couple of those brain cells to really think what they're doing in terms of modeling. So here I'm just going in and putting some of that darker turning tone, and if I miss my mark and go a little too much into the shadow with the stump, I'll just go in and reinforce it a little bit. Once again, at this stage, when you're big form modeling and you're trying to assess, are you doing it right? Basically, the rule of thumb is if you have to ask yourself, is it turning, then it's not turning enough. So what does that mean? That means you should probably darken the tones very near the turning tone, or sorry, the shadow edge, darkening the turning tone, which is right here. And also maybe avoid getting too dark in the middle of the form. Those are the two things that will reinforce your modeling, I want to say. So you can maintain the contrast between the lightest light of that area, as well as keep the turning tones to the sides, so that, you know, there's a good plentiful volume of the form, rather than a very dark sort of mass. It's a bit abstract, but this is one of those hard to grasp sort of things in this whole genre of painting, let's say, and drawing. Now you see there are these creases behind the knee. We entirely ignore those at this stage. The rule of thumb again here is if it has a name, speaking of, you know, a certain structure on the body, you just leave it out for now. Speaking of the smaller things, let's say. So if you can name it, say the fat pad behind the knee, that's not going in at this stage. We're talking, you know, the size of the things we're modeling is basically head, torso, pelvis, legs, feet, hands, arms. That's it. That's the scale we're working at. It's not called big form modeling for no reason. It is only the big forms at this stage. So we can see the leg is starting to take shape. There's a weird dark line that I put in there. Not ideal, but luckily we have these things called erasers and stumps to remedy that issue. Here I put the tone on a little bit more generously, and now I'm just gonna sort of fade it into the edge. I think the value is all right, but we want to have it a little bit more subtle near the edge. We sort of went over this leg here, so let's just finish up this calf over here as well. So probably you're now starting to understand why variations of the darks being the next stage after this one is also about fixing the drawing, not just you know, working on the shadows, because big form modeling and the grouping of the dark stages can be a little bit messy. Let's put a little bit of tone on this thigh as well. This is the light facing side, of course, but we do want to have the idea that it is still round, not just flat. So the darker sort of turning tones would be on that side. Let's just imagine that there's maybe a little bit of that showing, and also this thigh is sort of also going along with the light. It's not really facing the light source, which would be a plane sort of oriented like this. The thigh is sort of oriented like this, so it's kind of going to be a little bit darker overall than anything like maybe this area over here, which would be kind of directly facing the light source. Did a little bit too much over there, so I'm just toning it back. This pointy eraser, the Mono Zero, is pretty good for stuff like this, where you can just kind of softly hatch into tones to push the transitions where you want them. I highly recommend using that to your advantage. So now we arrive at the pelvis area. Generally, we can look at this as a boxy kind of shape, just sort of toning in this side plane. It's not like a cylinder anymore. So it's more like there is a side plane over here, then there's a top plane that is facing the light source a little bit, and then the top plane sort of rounds off into the glutes here. So we can perhaps just darken maybe slightly. I mean, there could be a little bit of movement here, darker to the side, it's not like actually flat, it's still a little bit round, but the concept is more of this box rather than something round. So I think we need to darken a little bit more in here. Actually, this shadow should kind of carry on underneath this hand as well. Just sort of ignored that before, so let's just put it in now. Soften that edge a little bit to make it a little bit more realistic. It was looking a little bit graphic without any shadow, so just went ahead and put something in for that. Okay, we just ignore the information that these creases and any anatomy is kind of giving us in a more general sense. We just want to sort of tone the bottom plane of the glutes, and then we can create some kind of transition towards the top plane of the glutes. And perhaps we can go a little bit darker underneath, so we can really sort of emphasize the form a little bit more. All right, so maybe that's enough for that. Let's just put a little bit of turning tone on this side as well. It's not really ending on a paper white tone over there. And moving forward, let's again put some tone on the edge as well, even though it's the sort of light area. We don't want it pure white. So this area over here for the torso, we're imagining a sort of egg shape for the torso. We sort of ignore the arms for now. We just think of the torso itself. It's sort of round overall, slightly round, and we want to also darken it as it sort of recedes from the top. We know that the torso kind of rounds off underneath itself, let's say, because there's this, the spine works kind of in an S-curve type of shape. We know the torso sort of ends around here. That's probably not very visible, but let's just make a slight mark here. So if our spine is an S-curve, which we know it is, the torso sort of starts curving around and creates this roundness, which then we can put on the entire torso here. And of course the rib cage sort of wraps around this whole thing, so we can conceptualize this whole thing as an egg kind of shape, let's say. And that results in basically us being able to also tone a little bit darker this area in here, even though it's being lit by the light source pretty well. It's sort of facing the light, but we want to emphasize the form here, so it's sort of lightening up towards this top part. And of course it'll also be rounding from here. Said we'll ignore the arms, but I'm sort of imagining it sort of involves the shoulder area, so we can actually consider the entire torso. We don't have to put some weird outlines in the middle of the form. So this is, conceptual stuff. It's not very easy to grasp at the very start. Honestly, understanding this well just comes with repetition. For me, it was, I think, around probably the second or first charcoal figure when I finally sort of felt like it clicked for me, this whole concept of big form modeling. I still remember that feeling of looking at the leg, I think it was, and realizing, yeah, now it's turning. Now I sort of get it. And usually, if it's tricky to grasp, then the most likely reason is that you're just not making the turning tones dark enough. I'm just gonna darken a little bit over here. Just sort of really try to emphasize the form. And maybe let's push that down a little bit. So I think we can push the waist up a little bit more. Just a little drawing thing over here. Maybe the rib cage sort of, or this sort of turn of the spine that ends at the rib cage here ends somewhere around here, not, you know, way lower, which also wasn't just looking right for me. So still, this transition is soft. Let's keep it that way. Just get rid of that thing over there. All right, you can just slightly darken over here as well. And maybe just a little bit of tone as well on here where it's turning towards the crest of light. It's not quite there yet, so let's just put it over here. And here, of course, it sort of melts into the arm then, which next we can model the arm. Again, moving back to the more simple cylinder stuff. Occasionally looking back at the camera so I don't run out of memory card space because it's pretty close. Sort of want to wrap this stage in 10 minutes, so. On the hand, I see there being quite a sort of vague edge for the shadow area. I'm not really sure where it sort of starts and ends, so I'll just work that turning tone all the way along the edge and also rub it in a little bit. So just gonna soften this a little bit over here. Again, with the lighter line next to the shadow, not great, destroys the form. Let's go and take care of that. Then we put some turning tone over here as well. Also, I just darkened the hand overall a little bit. It's quite light on the photo over here, but perhaps we don't want it to be extremely light, more of an artistic decision there, since it just draws attention otherwise. And perhaps we can just darken this forearm a little bit as well. We don't need it extremely light either. So modeling is not only about turning tones, of course we need to have all the tones, so just put in a little bit more information for those as well. The turning tone is just by far the most important thing for creating three-dimensional form. All right, things are looking pretty okay so far. Let's just darken this arm a little bit where it's sort of moving away from us. This part where it turns from the elbow into the forearm, there's only a sliver of it left. And then let's turn a little bit of this arm as well. It's mostly hit by the light source where we see it, so it's it's gonna be pretty light overall, but let's just get something in there. All right, perhaps we can actually reinforce this light effect after all. Just clean it out. want this part to be very light, and we want this part to be very light. So these things we want to be popping out, and perhaps we can just slightly now nudge these things around to sort of really give us a great sense of the light and form. Just making sure I really have those lights in there. Perhaps we can get a little bit more of the light as well for this top of the thigh here, so it's not so dark. It's not so far from here where it's pretty light again, so want to have something like an even drop off there as well. Perhaps just a smidgen lighter here as well. A little bit of variety is also nice. And one more thing, let's just darken this arm area over here a little bit. Don't need it that. We don't need it that light. Also, it sort of turns below itself, so we want to, of course, darken from the bottom also. And we lost the edge entirely, so let's just sort of find something on there as well. And I think we can pretty comfortably start calling this a stage. Yeah, I think we went over everything. We will be rendering and cleaning things up, of course, in the rendering of the lights, so we don't mind it being a little bit messy here. If you want super nice fine transitions, you could use something like a very soft brush to even further smooth things out, but I think it's just faster to do that with a hard pencil as opposed to the tools. This is more for the rough toning of things, and then we go in and make things nice later. So I hope this was of help. I hope it's turning to you guys as well, but for me, I think the form is looking all right. Maybe in some places I could further nudge it a little bit, but mainly looking at this area over here. All right, next up, variations of the darks. All right, variations of the darks. So first thing I would say, we want to start looking at correcting whatever shapes we find are a little bit off due to the previous stage, you know. We do shift things around quite a bit during the previous stages, so now it's time to fix them. So it's time to grab the HB pencil and an eraser and actually start looking at the outlines a little bit. Just want to clean those up a little, since there's places where I actually went over the lines with the modeling a little bit. It's kind of unavoidable. And maybe in places you want to just lighten the outline a little bit in order to sort of work with the modeling. Ideally we would have no outlines at all, but just have a little bit of form turning at the edges instead of a line. A line can be a sort of stylistic factor as well. And I don't mind outlines, but just leave it at that for now. We'll render that later. Now is the time to just clean things up a little bit. You can see when I erase something, it leaves a little bit of that eraser dust. There's some specks of it on the paper, then I'll just try to lift those up with the eraser. It sort of picks those up more often than not. just because they can be a little bit distracting at times as well. So. Okay, the outline may be not the cleanest, but let's say functional. So perhaps we can just move to the variation stage here. Or let me just actually fix the drawing of this hand real quick. It's looking like an amorphous blob basically, so that's looking a little bit better. So over here we have a little bit of exaggeration going on. And looking at the reference now, I don't think I want to involve the head of the ulna in here. It's a little bit too far out to the right. I feel like maybe it should be just a dark plane instead, where we could see that shadow cast by the ulna here as a dark halftone.